Good morning. Welcome to Mornings with Meep. It's been a while. I thought I'd do an update on books I'm reading. These are not all the books I've read in summer and into fall, but I saw the last time I updated this was in June, and I just want to do a quick, touching on books that I finished reading recently. Start with Annotated Pride and Prejudice. I'm a long-time Jane Austen fan, so of course, not only have I read all her novels that she finished over and over again, I have read completions of Sanditon. I have read her Juvenilia. Her History of England is very funny. Um, and written when she was a teenager, if I remember correctly. I've read a lot of commentary on Austen, especially Money Matters and Austen, yada yada yada. Well, this year I came across a set of annotated versions of Austen's novels, annotated by David Shepard, and this has been very useful to me in terms of understanding some of the stuff they talk about. There are loads of illustrations of, say, the fashions, the houses, the carriages. And if you don't know the difference between, say, a gig and a barouche, uh, Shepard will absolutely show you through pictures and explanations, as well as how meaningful it is that someone has a carriage and has multiple carriages. It makes a good money is actually a huge part of Austen novels. Anybody who has read them knows this. A lot of people remember the witty repartee, but they're always talking about how much money, what fortune a person has. So he really gets into kind of where people stack up in the status hierarchy, who's on the way up, who's on the way down. You don't really need to know all of these details, but if you're the kind of person like me who likes to know the details, you will get a lot of good information out of these books. Some of his footnotes are about his interpretation of various interactions, and I don't always agree with those, but when he's talking about the historical context, the social context, that is very valuable. So that's the first one. Oh, and by the way, if I link to any of these to Amazon, I'm an Amazon associate and I get a very small cut of any sales through those links. Amazon dinged me about not warning people that if you click on an Amazon link from me, I might make a very small amount of money, but you have been warned now. Okay, this next one, I love Herman Melville. Um, he is so weird. I mean, it's like Dostoevsky in many ways, and I don't mean in terms of what they're writing about or even their personalities. It's just some of the stuff you get a flavor. It's very weird, and I really actually enjoyed this very strange novel, The Confidence Man, His Masquerade. First off, because it took me a while to figure out. I could see the cons, but it's the same con man until you get two characters who I think are both con men up against each other. But this is really following a con man through his day on a riverboat, um, obviously in the U.S. on the Mississippi, and it's got some really interesting stuff, and it gives you a flavor. I need to make sure this is definitely before the Civil War, and given that it's before the Civil War, he does, slavery does come up. The how should you? I don't even want to say relationship, but dealing with Native Americans comes up, and different because he's kind of coming out of New Orleans and the really odd, I shouldn't say odd, but the mix of peoples you get coming out of New Orleans and along the Mississippi River. Very interesting. I had an audiobook version of this, and the different accents were very interesting to listen to. And what's interesting is it's almost like everybody is running a con here, not just the central con man. Very interesting book. It's kind of weird though. Fangs, this is by Sarah Anderson, who does really cute cartoons. And these are cute cartoons too. It's a vampire and a werewolf dating. And so this is basically kind of a comic series following the relationship on how how can a vampire and a werewolf get along, and it's very cute and it's quick. Okay, the Prime Minister. Now, this is in the middle of Anthony Trollope's um, political series. And what I want to talk about here, first off, for Anthony Trollope, he's a one and done. I am not interested in basically reading any of his books over again. And I have read a lot of his books. And he did kind of have a reputation go down because people found out how he wrote. He didn't sit and wait for inspiration to hit him. This is how he made money. He sat down, butt in chair, and wrote every day. And yes, some of this is just incredibly boring, stupid, etc. Now, the political series, the Palliser series with Plantagenet, Planty Pal, it was very interesting, and you're following specifically one particular man and his family. Um, Most of the plots are romantic plots, not political. However, there is this background thread of what's going on in politics during the 19th century in the UK. And some of them, it's all about reform. It will sound very weird, some of these to Americans, but one of the things, of course, is cleaning up rotten boroughs. And rotten boroughs, if you think people complain about the Electoral College, at least it's somewhat attached to the actual population amount in a state. Rotten boroughs were the case where you had a bunch of different parliamentaries, what do they call them? I mean, I know they're called ridings in Canada, but I don't know, I forget what they're called in the UK. Anyway, districts, whatever, that send in members of parliament. But because of the Industrial Revolution, you had cities like Birmingham really building up in population and not getting parliamentary representation that is in proportion to their population. These rotten boroughs tended to be these rural districts, which were hollowing out because of the Industrial Revolution or just not growing as fast as the industrial areas. So they needed to reapportion who got the different MPs, the members of parliament, and how many. And another thing about the rotten boroughs was not everybody could vote. And kind of slowly over the 19th century, they kept expanding the franchise so that more and more men could vote. Obviously, it wasn't until the 20th century that women were being allowed to vote in the UK. So there were, a series of reforms in Ireland, in United Kingdom, to fix all of this so people would get representation. So that's one. The other aspect was the secret ballot, and this was the secret ballot. It was like, oh, that's a bridge too far for one of Phineas Finn, this Irish member of parliament. So, okay, let's fix the representation. We want to have it so that there's not so few electors per district, and of course, completely controlled by the local aristocrats, yada yada. But the secret ballot, that's so American. And a lot of people don't realize elections were public in terms of you went to, say, a tavern where the votes were being taken. You would do it in front of everybody else. They knew who you voted for. And of course, there was a lot of just plain paying off electors. And that shows up of the amount of money being spent on the parliamentary elections. And basically, you buy a parliamentary seat. And it gets to be a little, controversial there. I don't think they have the secret ballot by the end of the series of novels. In any case, these novels really aren't about the politics. Those are just kind of a background. We do have, this is the Prime Minister where Planty Pal is in charge of a coalition government, and that, of course, is going to dissolve at the first, the first opportunity. But I found it, this is something, it's very removed in time. It is based on the real politics of the day, but the primary plots are your standard 19th century novel, plots. Romance, mainly. Okay, that Hideous Strength, I've covered this one before. This is the space trilogy of C.S. Lewis, but I just want to put this out there in terms of you don't need to have read the prior two novels to understand what's going on in that hideous strength. And it's interesting. It's got some interesting ideas. C.S. Lewis has a lot of rough spots in his works, so some of it doesn't quite work and is quite dated now. But I think a lot of it still works, especially in terms of organizational politics and how one can get sucked into that. Though that's just at the beginning, and it gets into something a lot more sinister than your normal politicking in bureaucratic groups. Okay, Death in the Air. True story of a serial killer. This is about the Great Smog, Great London Smog, and I don't remember 1952. And it tracks some people who were basically killed by the smog, and it had to do with really cheap coal. Again, this is about Britain. Certain things actually, America does pop up in this because there had been a similar killer smog, I believe, in Pennsylvania in years before this. And there are so many things in here, such as people not realizing what a huge mortality event it was, and it was. Uh, so you have that aspect of it. However, the author is also folding in a serial killer story that is going on at the same time, and some of how he got caught. And yeah, and he murdered his own wife, but other people as well. So uh, it's interesting. I found the items on the smog a lot more interesting, especially the aspect of having this huge mortality event. People were actually just falling down dying during the smog, um, and it just not really being covered in the news. That most of it was focused on the effect on traffic, and that, of course, because people couldn't see, they didn't have visibility, you had more car accidents and that kind of thing. So, interesting. Okay, the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, which, of course, is a phrase out of Sherlock Holmes. Um, this is, a well-known book. I was interested in it because, of course, the main character is an autistic teenage boy, like my own son. That said, this boy has certain, is able to do certain things. It sounds like he is in, um, yeah, he's in special education classes. However, he does know and he can communicate more than my own son can, for example. But certain aspects of the book really rang true to me for that central character of how he reacted to various, things he got into. This is actually not a very happy book, and the mystery does get solved, but it's a pretty brutal mystery in terms of it's about a dog that gets killed. But there's really other things going on, and it's pretty bleak. There is no happy ending here, and that's all I can say about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about one of the lecture series that I got. I'm a subscriber to the Great Courses Plus, but I also download the lectures through my library, which is how a lot of people come across the Great Courses. It used to be the teaching company. Lectures, English in America, A Linguistic History. Now, this one is pretty short. I think it's like 12, I think it's 12 lectures. So obviously this is audio. And it goes through some of the changes in different areas of how English has been used in America. And it is kind of skimpy, but that's okay. What is interesting is that American English is continuing to change. There's evidently some vowel shifting going on in American English, so that's kind of interesting to hear about. And certain aspects that are special to American English compared to the other Englishes in the world. And then finally, to say nothing of the dog or how we found the bishop's bird stump at last. I've read this book several times. When I'm not feeling, too great. I like reading a comedy, and this is a comedy. It's a time travel comedy. And I know that sounds, too farcical, and there are some farcical aspects of this. Uh, the main characters have to go back to Victorian England, like late 1800s, to find this bishop's bird stump. And you'll find out it's a just execrable art piece that's in Coventry Cathedral that they totally made up as being in Coventry Cathedral. I don't think this awful thing really exists. That's part of the humor. But they are trying to undo damage they think they've done. They think they've changed the past, and they kind of have. Time travel plots don't think about it too deeply because they always fall apart. Given that it's a comedy, I can put up with it. It's like when Futurama did it. I can put up with comedic time travel plots. There are some other time travel plots that are consistent. Like I liked 12 Monkeys. I think that was well done as a time travel plot. But in general, in sci-fi, time travel plots are just not my thing. Anyway, those are the books I've been reading. I'm reading more. I'm always reading. So, all of these are good. Some are better than others. I highly recommend To Say Nothing of the Dog. Earlier in the year, I did talk about Three Men in a Boat, where this To Say Nothing of the Dog comes from because it was the subtitle of that one, which is a Victorian comedic book. And that is funny in its own way, and a lot of contemporary British humor sprouts out of that style that was in that book. Connie Willis is not British; she's American, and it's a fun book. Okay, talk to y'all later.